Spanish was not spoken in my home growing up, but when my father calls me these days, he greets me, "Hola, mija, ¿cómo estás?" And I answer, "Bien, ¿y tú?" I'm rooted in small towns of the Pioneer Valley. My family half Yankee and half Polish, but my daughter's family includes Mexicanos and Filipinos from big border cities in the Southwest. I'm white, but I replaced my Black Lives Matter signs repeatedly after they were vandalized, then stolen, first from my lawn, then from 15 feet up a tree on my property where one of the replacements had been nailed. I'm an atheist who was raised with secular observances of Christian holidays. But people often say my work is tikkun olam, Hebrew for fixing the world. And I've been working lately with a couple of true mensches, trying to clear the name of one of the most infamous Jews in US history. I'm a communications professional, a wordsmither, a holder of a 9-to-5 desk job. But my circle of family and friends is filled with artists. So really, it's not surprising that sitting in my office, feeling raw and bleak 2 days after last month's presidential election, I didn't just flick past the photos that popped up of awful, vile graffiti on Mount Tom. Instead, I immediately began to think about doing something in response. Something to address those ugly words attacking Black people and Jews and hailing our president-elect. Mount Tom is a landmark visible from all over East Hampton. It fills my bedroom window when I wake up in the morning and go to sleep at night. I see it from my living room, my dining room table, from my deck. I watch the paragliders and the hawks sail on the thermals off its cliffs, and the seasons change in its foliage. So when I looked at those photos of the mountaintop painted with messages of hate, I imagined blanketing them with messages of love instead, of laying down something soft over something so hard, and refusing to allow the nasty words to sit there unanswered. I knew I wasn't the only one who'd been feeling stunned and sickened and paralyzed and demoralized by the amount and the degree of public ugliness that's been embraced and allowed in this country. The next morning, a couple of us hiked up the cliffs where the graffiti was to take some photos and scope out what might be possible. I'm afraid of heights. The drop-offs from the cliffs is steep, and the wind was whipping that day. So combined with looking at those horrifying messages in person, I was feeling pretty wobbly. But while we were there, people began arriving, armed with water, brushes, power tools, and outrage to scrub those messages away. And that was inspiring. I'm guessing many more people showed up to remove those messages than had been up there adding them. Over the next few days, a plan emerged to gather and paint bed sheets and blankets with messages to counter the words of ignorance and hatred. Messages calling on people to put bigotry to bed and blanket hate with love. Several adults and a couple of kids stopped by my house that next week. The kids didn't know what they wanted their sheets to say at first, but they made some sketches on paper and decided to paint words and symbols. A giant multicolored heart on one sheet, and the message, "Love is love," on another. They also didn't know what the word bigotry meant, so the grown-ups explained. Using paint and bright orange duct tape, we decorated the old sheets and blankets laid out all over my basement. As we worked, we chatted a little bit about the election and politics in general, but mostly we just created our pieces quietly. each of us focused on the message we wanted to present and taking comfort in doing something active and communal. On the second weekend after the word spread about the graffiti, another group of us trekked back up the mountain with the sheets and blankets in our packs. At the top, we pinned the pieces together like a giant quilt, each piece with a different message, and we draped them over the cliffs. We blanketed the site of the graffiti with our united statement of resistance and of love. As our new flag billowed in the wind, a huge group of people began appearing on the mountaintop. It's a pretty rugged hike up to that spot, but people came by the dozens. Old people, wee little kids, brown people, black people, white people, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists. They arrived for an interfaith service at the summit to reclaim the mountain. After explaining what we were doing with our action, I hung out a little way down the cliffs, just out of earshot of most of their ceremony. But glancing up and seeing all those people there, and knowing they'd all come because they refused to let those threatening messages go unchallenged, was a beautiful thing. It was very moving. When all this started, I was feeling stunned by the amount of ugliness out on public display so boldly in our city. And it hasn't just been here, of course. Traditional and social media have allowed us to see countless similar incidents all over this country, some much more threatening and personal than the Mount Tom graffiti. For example, not long after our Put Bigotry to Bed unfurling, one of my daughter's cousins shared a disturbing photo. This woman was born and raised in Mexico, but became a U.S. citizen just before this election and was so proud to vote for the first time. She's also the executive director of a museum celebrating new Americans, immigrants, in San Diego. Within a few days of our Mount Tom action, in broad daylight, someone defaced an exhibit in her museum with this message: "Too much immigration. Go back to your country. This one is ours." We've all heard about or know people who've been threatened, assaulted, or even killed because of who they love, what they look like, where they come from, or what faith they follow. Some of us are those people who've been the targets. And some of us are the ones doing the targeting. It's frightening and disorienting for me to reckon with these truths, and to know that folks walking around in this town where I live, work, and play have such wildly different ideas of how we should behave to one another and feel about our neighbors. I don't know how we're all supposed to coexist in such a state. I get a little panicky when I think about it. But that Saturday morning a few weeks ago, perched in the warm and breezeless sunshine on the cliffs of Mount Tom, looking down at my city, I could also see these messages on cloths of different colors, shapes, and sizes. I saw my friends, my family, and a rainbow of strangers all gathered to stand up to bigotry, connect with one another, and spread love. It was the fabric of community, quite literally. And at that moment, I felt calm. I felt peaceful, and I felt hopeful.